Good afternoon. How's everyone doing? Are we ready? I hope you're as excited about this as I am. My name's Kapama Yalpala. I go by KP. I'm a senior fellow and lecturer at the Yale School of Public Health and our lead for the health track at the Innovation Summit, which has been very enjoyable. So I'm just going to briefly introduce my good friend, Dr. Megan Ranney, Dean of the Yale School of Public Health. She's the CEA Winslow Professor of Public Health and Professor of Emergency Medicine at Yale University. Dr. Ranney is a practicing emergency physician, researcher, and leading voice for innovative approaches to public health. She's also just a shining light in this very important time for us in health policy and innovation. So with great pleasure, I'd like to introduce her and the secretary to the stage.
Thanks, KP, and it's a joy to see all of you here this afternoon. Can we give a big round of applause to the Yale Ventures and Innovation Summit team? I know how hard they've been working on this, and it's just such a joy to see folks together in person. So it gives me tremendous pleasure to be able to sit up here today with Alex Azar, just as a brief introduction for those who are not familiar with his multitude of accomplishments. Alex was a Dartmouth College grad, went to Yale Law School, so very proud to have a fellow Bulldog up here. Then was general counsel and deputy secretary of HHS under Bush. Left there, went into the private sector, was president of Eli Lilly in the United States, and from Eli Lilly went back into the US government where he was Secretary of Health and Human Services for 4 years during Ebola outbreaks, the COVID pandemic, and lots of other things that we don't think about because of the time that he spent really helping to lead the country through Operation Warp Speed and many other developments that helped get us to the other side of COVID. He's now working in health innovation, is a professor in Miami. We're lucky to have him sit on our Yale School of Public Health Leadership Council and may have some other things in the works, hopefully getting him up here back to Yale more frequently. But it's a real pleasure to get to sit and have a conversation with him today. He's one of, I think, the country's most important thinkers in terms of the intersection between government, private sector, PE, venture capital, kind of thinking about the future of health innovation in this moment where so much is up for grabs, and we're certainly sitting in the middle of some real disruption. So Alex, thank you for joining us today here back at Yale. Really honored to have you.
And I'm delighted to be here, and delighted to be here with Megan, who Yale is so fortunate to have her as the Dean of the School of Public Health. We've been friends now for the last several years. So glad to be with you on stage.
So true story is actually why you should always talk to the person next to you in the airplane. We actually met by sitting next to each other on a very small airplane, and I looked over and I was like, is that Secretary Azar? and started having a conversation.
It was incognito.
Yeah. So although you and I have been fortunate to spend a fair amount of time together, not everyone, I kind of gave the quick overview about your career journey, but I wondered if you could share a little bit with the audience about how you've moved through the innovation ecosystem, kind of in and out of private sector and government, kind of how that's progressed over the years.
Yeah, so my whole career has pretty much been at the intersection of microeconomics, business, P&L, and public policy, sort of where those two intersect and connect up. And so I was always much more of a technocrat type secretary or government official. And for me, I just tried to always do things in public life in many respects the way I would have done them in the private sector, which often is really bad politics. So one of the things that I learned with Operation Warp Speed is, whenever you're running a business, you want to have, as Jim Collins would say, a big, hairy, audacious goal. And so, because that motivates the team, it causes the team to stretch, to really try to aspire to things that they don't think are possible. That's what hopefully good leaders do, is you try to get a team, an organization to achieve something that they never thought on their own they could do. Laid out a goal of enough vaccine for all Americans by the end of the year, which, great as a BHAG, and private sector. Horrible politics, though, because when you say, well, maybe there's a slight chance that we will have a vaccine, maybe, that became, Secretary Azar has made an ironclad commitment. I learned that the media and politics don't deal in the subjunctive or the conditional tense of words. Well,
I love that. But you met that goal, essentially. Yep. By the end of the year, maybe not by the election, but you came close.
Yep. That was not the goal. The goal was FDA authorized vaccine by the end of the year and enough vaccine for all Americans by the first quarter, and we did pretty much achieve that. But that was that merger, as you said, that merger of private sector and public sector, and understanding how each respects each other's sphere and can actually be, symbiotic is the word, but to achieve a goal like that, those public-private partnerships, the thing I emphasize there is public-private partnership. It's the third word, partnership, which means, and for some people that's difficult. It means it can't be an adverse relationship. It has to be a respectful one, understanding each are bringing something to the table. For me, what the government can bring to the table is, of course, the law, the force, the power that you have. Like I had Defense Department with my back. That's a lot. The money, the significant aggregations of capital. But you can solve microeconomic problems. You can solve incentive problems where the private sector wouldn't deliver something without the government's intervention. That's why we have things like the NIH funding basic primary research. No pharma company is going to be able to fund that commons of scientific knowledge. The government does that, and then we have very effective tech transfer and enable the further capitalization of those innovations. But it's that intersection where they meet. That's sort of where I've lived my whole career.
Well, and I think you did an extraordinary job while secretary in a way that many secretaries have not leaned into in kind of creating that melding or partnership. I wondered, but right now kind of things are changing a little bit. I think, most of us in the room would think that the role of the public sector in defending the public good of health is irreplaceable. Well, the role of the private sector in both creating sustainability, margin, monetizing, scaling is also irreplaceable. I would love to go a little deeper into that thought about how policy and government facilitates innovation and the reverse. And I don't want to ignore the elephant in the room. And so I will get to that around kind of how we react in this moment where many of the things that we counted on are being made a little more uncertain, if I'm going to use a euphemism. But so share more about how you're thinking about how you have traditionally thought about that intersection between policy and innovation, or between kind of the government and the private sector, and what role in a perfect world academia plays in that.
Yeah, so if we're stepping back sort of
5 to 7 years, say, yeah.
Traditionally, I mean, what we would have is the massive investment of NIH funding, the world's largest biomedical research institution, where we're funding primary research, basic research, as I said, that would not be generated by the private sector. So you're solving a market incentive problem by having NIH do that, both with their intramural and the significant extramural programs. The extramural is very often through academia, of course. As well as other investigators. So that seeds so much innovation, but that doesn't get us medical products. It doesn't get us therapies. It doesn't get us vaccines. What it gets us is knowledge that then can be patented, that then can be licensed to those who then will take it the rest of the way by being able to aggregate capital to do the massive investments in clinical trials, manufacturing, commercialization, et cetera, that has to happen. So again, it's that continuum. There's this, sometimes people think NIH invents all the drugs. No, they get insights like if you block, if you have an anti-IL-17 mechanism, it's going to radically help with psoriasis, for instance. And then you can work and try to block the IL-17 receptor, for instance, and that's what you then do in the private sector. Then at FDA, you have to have, in my mind, a predictable, transparent regulator.
Mm-hmm. Ideally, yes.
Well, the challenge is, again, it's all about aggregation of capital. And so if you want to get the significant billions and billions of dollars to be invested, every bit of uncertainty creates basically an error bar on the investment thesis, a discount, a higher discount rate. And so I think that's why, for me, I was always trying to make sure that FDA is very predictable. It's a regulator, it's not a business partner, but it still can be transparent, predictable, et cetera. Obviously, right now, there's a lot of change happening.
And how are you thinking about, well, actually, before I get to the change, how about the CDC? So we talked about NIH and FDA and innovation. How about the CDC? Folks don't often kind of mention their role.
Yeah, CDC's not really been talked about much yet. I suspect it will. For the first time ever, the CDC director has to be Senate confirmed, so I would anticipate that they're probably holding back on revealing their full plans until that individual gets through confirmation, as they have done elsewhere. But we've talked a lot about what have we learned about CDC. We need better communications. I mean, a lot of things, frankly, that you've built the entire agenda at the Yale School of Public Health around are a lot of the challenges where CDC needs to, and public health needs to be reformed, around data systems, around basically interoperable, aggregated data with the world's best analytics put on top of that, around risk-based communication about information, behavioral communication, how do we communicate all of that effectively? I mean, go through the list of things. I think there's going to be a significant effort. Already, we've seen a bit of an effort to peel back on a lot of what one might call the mission creep of CDC. Get your day job, nail your day job first before other things are put in there in that mix. And I have a feeling that that's going to be a focus of the new team.
Fair enough, which then, of course, impacts the innovation ecosystem because some of those day job functions may or may not get filled, which then makes it a little tougher from an uncertainty perspective. So, and how are you thinking about this uncertainty in this moment, right? So you're sitting on a bunch of private boards, advising companies, trying to kind of give some certainty to people in this moment that feels chaotic.
I try not to give certainty. In fact, I think it's important to acknowledge the uncertainty. There's a time of great uncertainty. Part of this is because we're in the middle, really, of I think one of the biggest political party realignments in American history, on the order of 1800. Andrew Jackson, 1860, Reconstruction, Grover Cleveland's election, 1932, post-war, 1945. The traditional Republican approach, which would have been more coastal, elite educated,
who are you waving your hands at here?
allied with big business, low taxes, deregulatory, interventionist foreign policy, free trade. I didn't mention that. That would have been sort of your traditional Republican constituency. I'd probably reflect a good deal of that.
One might say, yes. That Scalia clerkship kind of gives it away, but yes.
But now it's much more of an individualistic populist party. It's not fully there yet. It's getting there, where it's more heartland, more working class, more union members, more very much a sense of anti-big, of animosity, a sense that the system is rigged against you. And you can't get ahead, that others, the elites, are playing the game. You haven't been given the rule book to it, and you have anger against big pharma, big insurance, big government, big academia. Anything big is not trusted. And that's happening, but we're not there yet. You're still a lot of people that might have my type of views, more traditional views. You've got the individualistic populist movement that I think is burgeoning. But you see it even, and so where we end up on an issue is going to be very personnel dependent. Like who's in the meeting, who cares enough to make something a priority to advance it, who cares enough to make something a priority to kill something or to oppose something. Yeah. What's the respective balance of power at that very moment? And even among individuals, things could change radically. You see a lot of things like the administration in the morning might come out and say drug company prices need to be socialized. Cut drug prices, look to the European system, most favored nation, cut them. And then 4 hours later, you could have a press conference with a bunch of pharma CEOs talking about how the biopharmaceutical industry is the crown jewel of American innovation and our vehicle to defeat China in the world economy. it's like you get that that dissonance. So
a little bit of whiplash.
So for me, when I'm talking to businesses that I'm connected to or public audiences, I try to say you have to acknowledge this uncertainty. Because if somebody comes in and tells you they know what's going to happen, they're a charlatan, because the very people who are going to decide what's going to happen don't know what's going to happen. So,
you heard it here first. and so,
but I think you can also embrace that uncertainty. So we'll talk about NIH, say, and FDA. So, there's been a lot of disruption in NIH, a lot of personnel changes, a possible realignment of centers, proposed budget cut of 40%, I think?
That's right, around 40%.
Of NIH's budget. So first, I think most of us can acknowledge that these institutions, NIH, FDA, CDC, are not perfect. And probably have, just like big institutions like Yale, have probably gotten bureaucratic, ossified, maybe, frankly, could use some human capital renewal occasionally. And so start from that proposition that change is not always a bad thing.
Correct.
And then sort of get through the stages of grief of the initial change that one can't really, from our perspective, modify. But then think, okay, there's opportunity here. So NIH could have opportunity for those in academia and those in pharma and elsewhere by being more nimble, more efficient, frankly, break out of the traditional R01 PI funding. I mean, frankly, we've gotten to the point where younger people can't get grants, and no offense to people like me with the gray hair, but your brain elasticity is much, people in their 20s and 30s are doing the inventions that get Nobel Prizes generally, even if not recognized till later, but we're giving our grants often to more senior PIs because they've been there, done that, know how to write the grant, and not as much younger. So it could open up, maybe change could open up opportunity for new generations within NIH. People moving on creates opportunity for other people to advance and take leadership roles. I mean, they're positions that have been held for 40 plus years by the same individual. Mm-hmm. That doesn't leave a lot of hope to a deputy or a younger person there. So that's like at NIH. At FDA, again, FDA could, imagine if you're willing to actually restructure processes there and regulatory science, you could take what's effectively a 1960s regulatory agency and leapfrog now over Europe into a very modern regulatory science agency that's nimble, that's adaptable, that is very much focused on the patient, the patient who is waiting, the unmet medical need, sort of the way I find the oncology center to be the most flexible. And I always, frankly, wanted to have all of FDA get that way, but it was sort of a third rail to interfere.
Mess with the regulatory process.
The team doesn't really mind third rails. So that can be opportunity. Also, again, it's not to minimize disruption, harm, uncertainty, all of that, but it's also useful sometimes to think, but maybe there's opportunity here, and maybe at the end of the day, these institutions can come out better than where they were before.
Yeah, and I mean, you know me well and know that I will be the first to say that the systems were not working perfectly and that there has been change needed. At the same time, the wholesale disruption, the willingness to destroy before there is a new plan in place, is challenging, I will say, for those of us that are trying to train and nurture the next generation of scientists and doers. And I'm betting that it's challenging for many of the people in the room who are trying to figure out how to invest or how to structure their company when they're not sure what their drug or device approval process is going to look like.
All of what we who do biopharmaceutical investing and innovation, you're looking at your Monte Carlo probabilization, your MPVs in the future, and you're having to discount for uncertainty, regulatory uncertainty, just everything in that now. So that's a challenge. The other thing is, when we run businesses, the move fast and break things, that can work. It can be an effective business technique. I've had budget targets where I've had to, in private sector, just remove wholesale functions.
Right. And
you're like, can I live without it or not live without it? And then if you found you can't live without it, you maybe rebuild it, but in a more lean, efficient way, maybe better, more effective. With human health and health agencies, That's
it's a bit challenging as we
different proposition.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it is an opportunity. If you want to come up with a better way to screen for lead poisoning that doesn't require our departments of health to spend the money that they spend on the humans to do it, that would be lovely. In the meantime, we're seeing kids who are not getting diagnosed or treated. So in this kind of in-between moment, and we can talk a little more about what the ideal state, the future state would look like. In this in-between moment, how are you kind of thinking about what steps folks should take? So we have a lot of people in this room who are deeply engaged with either creating the science or trying to translate the science into individual level and population level products, innovations, ecosystems. What advice would you give to them for how to make it through this destabilizing moment? And then I will move into how we can help influence the creation of a better tomorrow, how we can be a phoenix from the ashes. I will get there. But first, how are you kind of advising entrepreneurs to think in this moment?
Yeah, well, first, the folks in this room are going to be so early stage. I think that probably it's more a focus on regulatory risk than commercialization risk, drug pricing, et cetera. That will, hopefully for all of you, will be your next worry. Right now, you don't get to worry about that so much right yet. I'd say to be careful in thinking about a public policy or political environment that what is today will not be 6 months from now. That is a lifetime in political life and public policy. And so things will sort in ways that maybe we can't predict, but there will be a sorting. Congress hasn't even had its chop on a lot of this stuff yet. So for instance, the NIH proposed a budget cut of about 40%. I can't give you any certainty, but I know these appropriators. I know the senators and the members of the House. At least from every single one of my experiences, having done that for now 24 years of off and on, I can't see that happening. I can't see appropriators cutting NIH's funding.
I hope from your mouth to God's ears. So
I just don't see that as a realistic outcome. I mean, heck, I had NIH cuts in my budget, but often it was a plug. To meet your target, because you knew Congress wouldn't cut it, and so it was like a free way
to make yourself look good. Yeah,
make your budget number work with OMB, knowing that there was no way that Congressman Cole and others are going to cut NIH. Not going to happen.
Yeah.
So.
And how can we lean in to help create that world? So now let's kind of move into the phoenix from the ashes. What can folks in this room do? What can they take away in terms of ways to help create that better system going forward? So your point in this moment is keep doing what you're doing, keep your head down, do the work, do the science, create the alliances, create the business, and things will shake out 6 months from now. How can we have influence in that meantime? And where in an ideal world would you see us going? Let's take, you talked a bit about FDA, and I know it's one of the spaces that you're most passionate about.
I mean, I think obviously for the individual investor, individual company at the venture level, this is not something that you should be spending a lot of time on. You should be focused on the patient, focused on the innovation, focused on the capital raising, et cetera. But for those of us who play more at the aggregated level, I think of it as opportunity of, if you could hand to the leadership at FDA or NIH a playbook that says, just you sign this and you'll have a vastly better organization, part of it is help them help you. Like we can all be upset or complain, but we can also hand them playbooks that say, you know what, if you made these changes at FDA would be a vastly better organization. It would be faster, it'd be more predictable. You would get more more therapies for unmet medical need. It would be more patient-centric. America would continue its global leadership in biopharmaceutical innovation. Or for Yale, for instance, with NIH, NIH wasn't perfect, and if NIH operated this way, it would be a better organization. Yeah. Or for you, a game plan for CDC of how can it be a better organization. So it's that constructive part of the stages of grief.
Absolutely. As we make our way through the curve, right. Yes. And it is where it is so lovely to be here and amongst this community, as I know there are a bunch of folks in this room who are actively thinking about those questions. All right, I'm going to pivot us a little bit to think about kind of taking off the government hat, putting on the private sector hat. you are spending a lot of time looking at innovation in healthcare and public health on a national level and even on a global level. I'd be curious about where you see the greatest opportunities right now, especially places where either academia or startups can play a role.
So I've been spending a great deal of my time since leaving on value-based care arrangements. So that's basically how do we, whether it's in kidney care or in Medicare Advantage or in managed Medicaid, how do we get providers to take risk for the total cost of care of the individual and provide holistic care to the individual, getting away from procedure-based fee-for-service? Why do we not pay historically for telemedicine or home health or air conditioning or food delivery? And somebody ends up in the nursing home because we don't pay for those things. We are penny wise, pound foolish. Why? Because we have a pay-for-procedure system, and our view is that if you pay for something new, that's just another way to turn the crank and generate more fees. But if instead you get a $12,000 budget for the total cost of care of an individual as a primary care practice, and you can help keep a person out of the hospital or the nursing home by putting a ramp at their house, air conditioning, food delivery, telemedicine.
You sound like a public health person right now, I'm just saying.
I guess we're not supposed to,
Yeah.
For some reason, social determinants of health got to be a bad word. I don't understand why, but social determinants of health. So I'm doing a lot of that now and seeing the results and seeing what works from a P&L and business perspective in doing that. And what doesn't? I mean, knowing your patient, the deep analytics, advanced medical records, the ability, you have to be able to focus 13 to 14 touch points with the patients that are going to be the sickest in your cohort. You have to find them, and then you have to have ways for NPs, PAs, other individuals to be able to practice at the full extent of their licensure to engage with those patients using telemedicine, getting transport for them, et cetera. You need to have sophisticated financial systems for bearing the risk that's involved in this. Again, deep IT analytics, et cetera. So that's one side. I have not personally done a lot of biopharmaceuticals since I've been out, but I am incredibly excited about where we are in terms of the biopharmaceutical industry, in spite of what we talked about earlier. We are literally at a golden age in medicine. I believe we are. That's why I just pray that we don't do anything to basically kill the golden goose right now, because we are yielding now the fruits of the Human Genome Project. We are yielding that deep understanding of the molecular nature of disease. It's taken a couple decades for that to trickle down to actual mechanisms and therapies, getting through the clinic and now to FDA. I mean, I've been with a kid who was 19 years old who walked into brought into a children's hospital with sickle cell anemia, and 30 days later left without a sickle in his body. Okay, I mean, we have the ability to do these things now. We're going to have deeply personalized medicine. We have to actually rethink our regulatory construct, because we are going to get to the point, just the young girl last week, where we are not going to have a therapy so much as what will look more like a procedure and an intervention that is customized to that individual, and our regulatory regime cannot handle it. We also saw a gentleman go like this. The other big challenge we have is we don't know how to pay for this stuff. We don't know how to pay for curative therapies. This is the microeconomist in me. We have a complete discontinuity of time horizon between those who pay and those who benefit in our healthcare system. I cannot tell you in the last 4 years how many times the most common business issue I have to deal with is where everybody around the table acknowledges this is an incredible innovation. It will deliver better care, whether as a biopharmaceutical or in terms of care delivery or in terms of IT, in terms of personalized medicine, whatever it is, and figuring out how nobody will ever pay for it. Everyone agrees it should be paid for, the system should do it, and nobody has the financial incentive to pay for it except for value-based organizations that own total cost of care, and even then the time horizons are too short.
Yeah. And or if they do pay for it, if we look at kind of the GLP-1s, it has the potential to bankrupt the system despite the huge downstream effects. So, and how are you thinking about innovation in that space around pain? I mean, so value-based care, yes. And I actually think this is, to me at least, this is one of the places where the current destruction of the system provides opportunities, because looking particularly in rural areas where we're looking now at healthcare deserts, and not just maternity care deserts, but true healthcare deserts. It gives an opportunity for some awesome entrepreneur to create a system that works. But how, in that ideal system, how would you think about that payment structure?
So it's a bit harder to do total cost of care in rural
Fair, because it's
rural
small
environments
and
of just not enough concentration. But I do think from an entrepreneurial perspective, I know it's cliche, but AI. First, AI is going to...
I didn't feed that into... I was going to get to an AI question that, yes.
but I mean, let's just think... I think of things at a practical level, not in the theoretical. Practically, right now, we're already seeing it. I'm sure Yale New Haven is doing this, where doctors are not having to basically do all of their own charting. The AI is listening. It's charting for you. It's drafting text and email responses for you as a physician to go back to your patient. So a lot of the low-hanging fruit, but every one of those things, that's a productivity enhancer, okay? That means that where we had one radiologist before functioning maybe at 50% of his or her time, maybe now that's up to 70%. We've just enhanced in the United States our radiologists, okay? AI, we know, can in many instances read a scan better than a radiologist can, more predictably than they can. If we have AI do the more repetitive work, then our radiologists, which are scarce, can focus on the more difficult cases and practice, again, at the top of their licensure, and then replicate that across every other aspect. In rural America, we have to reconceive what a hospital is.
Yeah.
We have a one-size-fits-all notion of what a hospital is to get paid, and it's just not an economically viable model in rural America. We have to, I like to think of it as a deconstructed Caesar salad. Like right now, we throw Caesar salad in rural America, and you say you have to have that, but we can't afford a full Caesar salad. We have to deconstruct and say, what are the elements you really need? Do you need an ER? Do you need inpatient beds? Do you need outpatient facility, ASC? We have to really think through that and change our payment regulatory system to create an economically viable system that will be sustainable and have appropriate reimbursement, of course, to meet that.
Right. I love that. And I think that there's a lot of models for us to look at in the global space. And I know there was a really neat panel on global health innovation earlier today.
And this is where, like, I forget the name of I was in Brazil. They have these wonderful clinics that are sort of, they look a little bit like our FQHCs.
Yeah.
Thinking about these sort of intake, primary care, some specialty, triage type things that those could be, I always thought that could be an excellent type of solution for a lot of our rural care deserts.
I look forward to seeing some of the people in the room, particularly our students or recent grads, creating those and disseminating. I'm going to do one final question, and then I will open it up to the audience for Q&A, so prepare yourselves. Now is your time to think about what you want to ask Secretary Azar. My final question is about trust. All of the stuff that we have just talked about, imagine we can keep the funding in place to create the products. Imagine that we can keep the regulatory infrastructure or improve the regulatory infrastructure to get safe and effective products out. We then have to get people to use them. And right now, that is one of the biggest challenges for those of us who are practicing in healthcare and those of us that are working in public health, and certainly for the entrepreneurs. I've had conversations with you before where you have some very interesting thoughts about how to increase trust in science. I wondered if you'd mind sharing those with our audience. How do you get people to use your product and trust that the science works?
Yeah, so I think first it's acknowledging the nature of the challenge and the problem. That, like, actually acknowledging there is a lack of trust, and that the feelings of individuals who have that lack of trust, I mean, I don't want to get too touchy-feely here, but
it's okay.
that you validate them. I think we make a big mistake when we say, you are wrong for not trusting. You are wrong for feeling aggrieved. You are wrong for feeling the system is rigged against you. That becomes condescension, and that, I think, breeds further distrust of sort of the view that, the elites are telling, it's sort of like the old back to a year and a half ago, the elites are telling me there's no inflation. Well, my real purchasing power has gone down 22% in the last 2 years. Sort of that. So acknowledging that that's real.
It's like when I tell my kids that broccoli tastes good, and they look at me and they go, "Mom, it doesn't really." Yeah.
But so some of it is that, and then and recognizing that now there's sort of public health institutional trust issues. That's going to be very hard. That's going to be a very long process, I think, rebuilding, and I don't have a magic wand on that one other than treating people with respect, as like respecting their intellect, and being transparent with information, acknowledging what we know, what we don't know, really acknowledging uncertainty around data or effects, et cetera. Then there's on the drug side. I mean, I guess on the innovation side, I tend to worry less about the trust issues there because when you're sick and you can get cured, I have not seen evidence yet that somebody with sickle cell anemia is not trusting to get the therapy. Maybe that will happen, maybe that exists, but I tend to worry less there. I think it's more, for my mind, in the public health regulatory regime. Now there is
chemo distrust. People go to kind of alternative medicine.
There is that. Which so that is absolutely true. And there, I guess, it sounds harsh, I guess, but you're in the driver's seat. I mean, you're
medical freedom, huh?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and in fact, I think we got into some of the distrust and situation we're in by, again, some parts of government not respecting people being able to make a choice on those things.
Yeah.
And that created a lot of backlash that we're now having to live with. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your honesty, Alex. I'm really grateful. I've, again, known you for a few years, and we don't always agree on everything, but we do agree on a lot of things, including the fact that most of us care a lot about health and that there is a lot of opportunity ahead for how to create it. And that intersection between the private sector and the public sector in an ideal world, it's actually been incredible to get to watch your journey and the incredible good that you did inside government, as well as the good that you are now doing outside government. And I'm really grateful for you sharing those insights, both that insider's perspective from the last Trump administration, but also the insider's perspective from the world of innovators, entrepreneurs, and big pharma. I'm going to open things up for folks in the room. I'm sure you all have some brilliant questions that I have not thought of. So if folks want to kind of raise their hands, I don't know if we have mics, so maybe I'll kind of repeat questions. Oh, we do. We have a couple of mics that will be going around. If you want to raise your hand, and I will ask you to just kind of tell us your name and what you're here from as you ask a question. I see someone up here, and then there's going to be someone over there, and then we'll go around from there. We've got about 15 minutes, so Miguel. I happen to know some people's names. Sorry, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for a wonderful talk. My name is Miguel, and you mentioned earlier how handing organizations like the FDA a playbook where they can just sign something and they'll have a vastly better organization. That's a way to move things forward in healthcare. How can we accomplish that for value-based care, knowing that you have been spending the past few years in that field?
Yeah, so the question was around how could we help those who were leading on value-based care. So the good news is we've got Abe Sutton, who is running CMMI, in the new administration, was a key player in creating most of the value-based care arrangements that we did when I was secretary. And so I think there's going to be very strong leadership there to drive. If anything, I keep pushing, go big, go big. We've got to stop tinkering. What I say, we ain't going back to fee-for-service, okay? So let's burn the boats. It's time to just, another cliche, pull the Band-Aid off, move to value-based total cost of care arrangements. So I'm hoping they'll move to things like geographic contracting and fee-for-service. We have to support Medicare Advantage because Medicare Advantage is value-based care. We actually need to unleash MA plans to have even more delegated risk down to providers, which is their way of doing value-based care, and more flexibility in all of that, because that's now 54% of the Medicare system. I think, in a way, fee-for-service is going to slowly disappear because the Inflation Reduction Act destroyed the standalone Part D drug benefit as an actuarial matter. They made it not economically viable. And so premiums doubled in 2024, they tripled in 2025, but then, right before the election, they did a $10 billion demo to pull the premium increases down to $35 a year, a month per year over the next 3 years. That is a lot of money for a senior on fixed income, which will, I think, drive people into Medicare Advantage, where you can get free supplemental benefit, a Part D drug benefit, often vision, hearing, dental, transport, et cetera. So that's going to take away one of those innovation engines, which is fee for service, because that's really where we do a lot of the tinkering right now. But it will convert people over to MA, which is the more of a value-based care arrangement. But I think we have to encourage going big.
Which is the perfect thing for an entrepreneur to do. I like it. We have a question over here.
Hi, my name is Amit. I have a startup called Catalyze. I was interested in understanding more about how do you think we can kind of bring lessons from financial markets or other areas into healthcare and things like R&D funding from NIH, and sort of like how can we create opportunities for kind of younger investigators to receive more grants, and how can we kind of create like opportunities for syndication and creation of third-party review and sort of opening up what NIH is doing and create opportunities that look a lot more like financial markets for the grant funding system to try to make it more efficient, or to bring similar areas like a reinsurance over to value-based care arrangements, or CLO type of arrangements in there and things like that. And like, how can we take these private market lessons and push it into kind of how government looks at funding?
Yeah, so I don't know on the NIH side, other than process efficiency and minimizing bureaucracy, process efficiency. So much of like I don't know if you've talked to Ranney, Ranney about this, but ARPA-H was very nimble and fast in being able to move and put money out. And I haven't looked at the law myself, but what she related to me was that basically NIH has the same authority, but they have sort of imposed all of the bureaucracy and strictures on themselves over the last many decades as they become bureaucratic, ossified, slow-moving, et cetera. And that's where with Jay Bhattacharya as the NIH director, he's a very respected NIH researcher himself, a funded researcher. He may blow some of that up and maybe get it much more nimble. I think always thinking about the economic side of the problem. So we just talked about the big drug pricing issue, like the $1 million gene therapy that nobody can afford to pay for because the benefit is actually yielded over the many decades, and your average 18 months with one health insurance plan. Well, we should think about that's an economic problem. So how could we fix that? I think you can collectivize some of that risk. So somebody who needs a high-cost therapy, you can actually create a co-op model. You could create a reinsurance model of either a covert or a transparent reinsurance model that all insurance companies contribute into. Fund therapies. You could maybe even do central buying of therapies with discounting for those expensive ones. So you sort of collectivize the risk for those who are having to basically absorb very high-cost therapies. Just thinking about everything from an economic perspective and breaking it down. Why is this not working? Actually, one of my favorite professors from here at Yale Law School was Bob Ellickson. He was a land use controls and property professor. And he used to say, when you're on Metro North and you're headed in Manhattan and you're on the north side of Manhattan and you look out and you see just burnt out buildings and you see land not being put to its highest and best use, you see not even just paved a burnout building not being used as a parking lot in Manhattan, you see irrational behavior like that, ask yourself a question: how is the government involved here? And I've literally used that as a mental frame my whole public life in government, which is why does healthcare uniquely not lead to lower prices and higher quality? Every other part of the economy functions that way. Break it down. Economic problem. Why? Third-party payer system that we have, which is, so then can you create economic fixes for that? So thinking about everything from an economic perspective and asking, why is this not working? Why does it yield higher prices and lower quality often every year?
Can I actually go off, and I will go to a next question in the audience, but to go off of that, if you actually think about the NIH model, and I know Josh and I have had some conversations around this, you started by saying that private industry is never going to invest in the foundational R&D that serves as the kind of linchpin of so much of our American innovation and entrepreneurialism. Is there a way to create a model where you do take the government out of it? What could the incentives be for industry to do some of that kind of, like Bell Labs, Hewlett Packard back in the day? There were examples of places and times where the private sector invested in some of that kind of foundational work.
Yeah, somebody was literally just talking about the old Bell Labs type model. I don't know whether that works outside of a sort of old Ma Bell monopoly structure, and I don't know the anthropologic history of those institutions and how much government funding was involved or covert government funding was involved that supported it. They very well might have been effectively little NIHs for DoD. I don't know. I don't think there's a way to. I mean, it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy of the commons. Without intellectual property on the invention, you're not going to get the investment. So then, would you get intellectual property in it? Is it a commercializable invention, or is it so foundational that you then still have? You'd have to put so many billions of dollars to get that insight, and then you're going to have to put even more billions of dollars to drive that insight into a concrete therapeutic or preventive mechanism to the finish line. I tend to think if that, because there's nothing stopping that from happening.
Right.
So I think the market is telling us that that's not an economically viable proposition usually.
Fair enough. It's an interesting thing for us to chew on and try to work out some economically viable ways of doing it. I see a question over here, and then in the front. I'll do in the back because I've ignored you all in the back. I apologize. So up front on this side, and then the woman in the green, and then we'll make our way back up to the front.
I just wanted to get back to the economically viable question. Healthcare in and of itself, at least on the care side of things, needs people and space, which are always the cost drivers of basically any business, and those are perpetually inflationary. And in healthcare specifically, if you create better drugs, that is actually a way to curtail that perpetually inflationary cycle, because then you make people healthier, which means they need less care, and therefore the cycle continues. But that's under siege because of high-cost drugs, and people often forget that those costs come down over time as we create more generics. And so there's an argument to be made that we should actually double, triple, quadruple down on biopharmaceutical innovation, because over time we're going to create a generics armamentarium, and that's actually going to eventually curtail the cost. And so can you just comment and reflect on that a little bit?
Ditto. Listen, the world of drug pricing is absolutely not perfect, okay? But again, think about drug pricing, each part of it. What doesn't work? Why does it not work? We have discounting. We have pretty radical discounting of drug prices. Why do we have discounting off of list price? Because we have a PBM middleman system that basically funds premium discounts for insurance companies by capturing rebates and not letting the patient get the benefit of those rebates. That is, in my mind, reverse insurance. That is having the sick overpay for drugs to fund cheaper insurance for the healthy. That's the opposite of how insurance is supposed to work. So I actually put out a rule that basically pushed through rebates to the point of sale for patients, so you got the benefit of those. Biden walked away from that. I don't know if we'll see Trump go back to that. But the other way you can sort of solve this is delinking any notion of reimbursement of the middlemen from list price. That could help get both transparency as well as help fix that aspect of drug pricing. So like Part D, drug benefit, that's the Medicare drug benefit. It functions pretty efficiently as a market. It just doesn't yield the benefits to the patient at point of sale. You have massive PBMs, 4 of them that represent literally every American, negotiating against giant pharma companies and getting really significant discounts off of list price by using formulary status as the tool to jam the drug company, because you basically keep you from getting access to the patient. So that works well. Part B, which is our physician-administered drugs, doesn't work well because we pay 106% of sticker price. That's why I created the Most Favored Nation program, to create a proxy for a pricing mechanism. And I actually viewed it as a trade measure, because I basically said, listen, increasing the hurdle rate here in the of the deals that you're going to give in Europe, because you're going to have to absorb that cost into your profit decline here in the United States. Only one person understood what was going on there. The French health minister called me and said, Alex, are you actually doing this? I said, yes. And she said, I'm going to have to ask the President of the Republic for more money. I said, Alice, you get it. You're the only person who gets it. You're going to have to pay higher drug prices.
A better technique than tariffs, perhaps.
You could see, you could see tariffs being used in an unrelated way. You know, you say to the Germans that, 200% tariff on BMWs unless you start paying your fair share of drug costs. Mm-hmm. I think that's a very Trumpy thing.
You heard it here first. I love it. The out of the box. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Nupur Garg. I am an emergency physician and lifestyle medicine physician, and I actually have a question about a recent report from the current Secretary of Health that was just published on Thursday, primarily focused on children's health, and I'm not sure if you had a chance to review it. Okay, because I was just going to ask your hot takes if you had any, because of your unique insights and backgrounds, if you had any ideas about what they were trying to do, what that means for us as innovators and things like that. So.
Was this the sort of the MAHA Commission report? Yeah, I'll be honest, I only know what I saw on news stories.
Okay.
Listen, I do think that there's an aspect that the focus on sort of nutrition, healthier living, et cetera, that can all be very productive. I do think, though, the rubber's going to meet the road when we get to access and cost questions around that. Mm-hmm. I keep imagining the discussion when somebody proposes to ban high fructose corn syrup, say, from sodas, and someone in the White House says, "Could you repeat the third word in that?" Have you heard of Iowa and Indiana and Nebraska and Kansas and that kind of thing? Or when it's all things about all organic or what have you, a lot of us don't live near a Whole Foods, can't afford to shop at a Whole Foods. So it's all sounds very good in principle until there's a reason in many respects we've ended up with highly processed foods.
They're cheaper.
A lot of it has to do with cost and access, but again, maybe we can. Certainly, we can make advances to get better on that, because it's undeniable we have an issue. I mean, we all have. But it's not just an American issue. I mean, it's. I travel the world a lot. We are all getting overweight, and it's not. And I don't think it can be ascribed to just more sedentary lifestyles. I don't think it just traces to that.
I think there's great opportunities for research, and the functional medicine is certainly taking off, so you've chosen a good field.